Welcome back, listeners. You've made it back to Arts and Crimes, episode 2. We're really excited that you're here. I'm your host, Kelly, and I'm here with same host as last time, but an additional bonus one. So we have Josh and my other brother, Brandon. Say hi, guys.
Hi, it's me, Josh.
Hey, Josh, Kelly. It's great to be here. I listened to the first episode, and I thought I need to be part of that. So I had my people call your people, and here we are.
Yeah, which was me. I am my people, and I called you, and I said, please come. So, yeah, I'm really excited because this one is basically like a 180 from last time, because last episode I feel like was very like fun loving, and this one is like, nope, there's murder and death and all those things that are in crimes. So I guess I should probably start with maybe a trigger warning so people know that death, murder, there's like sexual content and mention of suicide and all that kind of stuff. So just be ready for that. And if there's anything like egregious, I'll try and say something beforehand. But just
when is it we can, it's like too soon? Can we not joke about this one then? Because that's all I do. I don't have any knowledge.
This does date back all the way to, we're starting at the 1400s.
Okay.
So
that's probably safe to joke about death and murder.
I mean, I don't know if it's ever... you know what? We're going to find out.
All right.
We're going to find out today. So, okay, and this episode is probably going to be multiple parts because... so the reason that I started this podcast is kind of twofold. One, I thought it would always be fun to do a podcast. And the other is last year, my students, my AP and Ceramics 3 students, we accidentally got on the subject of H.H. Holmes, who is a really famous serial killer that they had never heard of. I promise I'm a good teacher, and I kept it very G. But I was
kept the serial killer G?
Yeah, I was super good at it, and I didn't want to lose my job, and I'm still teaching there, and it's great. Which is even funnier because later I met one of my students' parents at a art show that we had at our event, and she was like, "Oh, you're the one teaching them about murder," and I was like, "No, art. I'm teaching them about art." And she was like, "Yeah, whatever. We love you." So it was fine, but we talked about, and it just went like they just loved it so much that they asked me to do like quote unquote impromptu podcasts all the time. So it was like every Wednesday, because on Wednesday we had shorter schedules, we tried to do a podcast episode of some kind, just like off the cuff, kind of something that I had knowledge enough in my head of. And one of them was the Salem witch trials, but that was at the end of the school year. And I just was so busy most of the days, like actually doing teaching things, that I couldn't get through the Salem witch trials. I only got to do part of it. So I promised because they asked me to actually start a podcast so that when the kids that graduated, they could still listen to my podcast. And so I said, okay, if I start a podcast, I'll let you guys know, and I promise I'll finish the Salem witch trials. So that's the main reason why I really wanted to not only start the podcast, but make sure that I got this episode in there fairly quick. So as terrible as being like, I really wanted to talk about historical mass murders for my students, this is kind of the motivation behind this episode in the series. But it's probably going to be multiple because I just found the history of how media affected the Salem witch trials so interesting. The books that were published all the way back in the 1400s, the most famous one, the Malleus Maleficarum, is the first one we'll talk about. And that affected the trials. And a lot of the books that these witch hunters, because we're going to talk about witch hunters mostly in this episode, published books, because everybody can publish books if you were a middle-class man at the time. Because you didn't have to have any works cited or true stuff. I guess maybe you don't now, but all of these publications not only affected witch trials throughout the country, but they're information that we still reference today because there's demonology
When
stuff.
we're doing our own witch trials, we reference them.
Yeah. I mean, the last time I went to one,
Yeah.
the Malleus Maleficarum was for sure referenced. Okay, yeah. So the Malleus Maleficarum, all that kind of stuff is still referenced, and we still have lore and all that kind of stuff that comes from all of these things. And the media that sort of spins off of the witch trials historically is just incredibly far-reaching. So I felt like it very easily fit into the arts and crimes kind of section. So without further ado, we're going to start with the very first one, kind of the OG witch hunter, who is the author of the Malleus Maleficarum.
Was that Van Helsing?
No.
I was just about to make a Van Helsing joke. Yes.
No, did you know that none of these witch hunters are named Van Helsing?
That's a bummer.
Disappointing.
But there's maybe some treats in here that I found for you guys that'll like make up a little bit for it. But no, this is Heinrich Kramer is his name. And he's the one that's the oldest, 1430s, is when he was born. And that was in Schlesselstad, is probably how that's said. I didn't look up any of these
Don't worry,
words.
Brandon can help with your German pronunciation.
Clearly.
That's what he's here for.
Yeah.
Schleiselstad.
Schlesselstadt. It's actually near Strasbourg. It's in a French place called Alsace.
Alsace.
No,
That's it.
it's
The
ALS
sauciest of all towns.
ALSACE.
I would say probably Alsace.
Alsace. Okay. Well, it's better than what I said. So Alsace, France.
Those E's on the end, they don't talk.
Ignore them. Okay.
Unless they have an accent on them.
I will just continually reference to you because I want to read all the letters.
Alrighty.
Anyways, so that's where he was born. And from a young age, he was super religious, which I think happened with a lot of these witch hunters. They're not all of them, but a lot of them are very religious.
Catholic?
Very Catholic, yes. And he joined the Dominican order of monks at a young age and became preacher general and master of sacred theology. And then in 1474, so he was about in his 40s, he was appointed as Inquisitor of Tyrol, Salzburg, Bohemia, and Moravia. I'm not sure. Any of those, I'm not sure. And I'm very sorry to everybody. I didn't look up anything.
All of our mini fans in Moravia, we apologize.
Moravia. And he was really charismatic, really passionate, and he caught the eye of the Holy Father and was asked, along with Jacob Springer, to collaborate on the Inquisition of witchcraft and sorcery in the area at that time.
Who's the Holy Father?
Well, I don't know his name.
Like, what is that?
The Pope?
Is it the Pope?
Maybe. I mean, I'm going to believe Josh on that because I don't know. I didn't Google. I was just like, Holy Father, cool. And then I moved on. It's a super good question, though. You can Google it while I talk.
I'm literally doing that right now.
So they were asked to...
Yes, the Catholic Pope is often referred to as the Holy Father.
Oh, yeah, there we go. Good information. So then And in this time, they were doing trials and, finding people and inquisiting and that kind of stuff.
Sure.
And in 1485, there was sort of a event that they credit to Kramer actually publishing, like it was his motivation to publishing the Malleus Maleficarum, which I don't think I told you means the witch's hammer, or the hammer of the witch is what it's translated to. Which is like 1485. There's a woman named Helena Schurberin. Oh man, I should have looked up how to pronounce these names. But there is this woman named Helena Schurberin. And she was described, again, by men in writing, so take everything with a grain of salt. She was described as aggressive, independent, and not afraid to speak her mind, which makes me already like her a lot. But she was the wife of a prominent member of society, and at the time, Kramer was doing a lot of sermons and a lot of preaching about like witches, and a lot of it was very anti-women. He's very misogynist, and very much so one. And so she was very open-minded about how she did not agree with that. And she openly told him and other people that she didn't agree with his doctrine, that his teaching about women and witches was ridiculous, and she refused to go to any of his sermons and convinced other people to not go to his sermons. And she told them that his teaching was heretical, and Kramer hated that. And so one time he cited her as saying that that she like spit on him in the street and publicly cursed him, saying, "Fie on you, you contemptible monk, may the falling sickness take you." Which, like, whew, girl, them's words in the day, I assume.
Wait, but he just said that she said it, right?
Yeah, he said
We don't know if she actually said that.
We don't.
And correct. You would probably assume she would have had a sicker burn than that.
She may
locked
have.
and loaded.
For the time, that could have been the sickest burn.
Maybe.
Yeah. I mean, it was the 1400s, late
Fie on
1400s.
That hurt.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's not going home feeling good about himself. He also cited her as saying that she disagreed with his methods of finding witches, which was striking a pail of milk in order to gain knowledge of a sorceress who had taken milk from a cow. And supposedly if you strike the pail while she's holding it, he would know if she was a witch.
So he has to line up a bunch of women that might be witches.
Strike a pail.
He has to milk a cow.
No, they do.
They all have to milk a cow?
Yeah. And then
in front of him, or just
the pail of milk.
Just bring up. So I would love an ad goes out in the paper. All women, please bring a pail of milk that you have milked to the square. Nothing nefarious about this.
That I may strike it and know of your sorcery.
Yeah.
It's like stuff like that. And I just cannot say this enough. It is insane to me that this is real life. Like, this was real life to them, that this very important, prominent figure of the town that was giving them sermons, because most people couldn't read or write and were very unaware of how the world actually functioned. And so whatever he says, they're kind of like, wow, he's a man of God, he knows. And that's the reality for everybody, that all of this is real life. And it's just so insane to me, some of the things you'll hear like that.
I love that they're probably like, oh, he must have read that in the Bible somewhere.
Yeah. And they can't prove it wrong because they can't read.
Yeah. Remember that verse about the milk pails?
Yeah. It's somewhere in there, I'm sure. So he took her to trial, accusing her of being a witch, because the kind of nail in the coffin, or his smoking gun, was that there was a noble knight that she had been seen with, or he had been seen with her, and he got sick. And that knight went to the doctor, and the doctor was like, you have to stop hanging out with Helena. And it was doctor prescribed to not be around Helena. But he was like, no, I'm going to do what I want. And then he died. And so Kramer was like, he killed the noble knight. And he took her to trial with this, quote unquote, evidence. And the bishop that was in charge, Bishop Glossier, was like, this is insane evidence. And Kramer was like, you know what's more insane is there's 13 other women that are also involved. So he accused Helena and 13 other women of being witches in the area. And the bishop was like, no, none of this makes sense. And they were all acquitted. So none of them got the guilty verdict. And Kramer was so mad that he wrote and published the Malleus Maleficarum, which is an insanely anti-woman piece of literature. And I just, I have to read some of because I read most of it. I couldn't get through all of it because it's very like circuitous in its manner of speech. And so he'll like talk circles around a point. Each chapter is more like a question that he answers. And so like chapter 6 is concerning witches who copulate with devils. Why is it that women are chiefly addicted to evil superstitions? Which, if I had a ghost friend, I would listen to them a lot too, to be fair.
So you're proving his point.
I know. Like, I wish I had like a ghost roommate. It would be amazing. I don't.
That should be the quote on the back of the next edition of the Maleficent. What's it called?
Malleus Maleficarum.
Malleus Maleficarum is you going, I wish I had a ghost friend. Kelly Boyle's podcast.
But some other chapter headings that I thought were great was whether witches can sway the minds of men to love or hatred, which, whether witches may make some magic illusion so that the male organ appears to be entirely removed and separated from his body. I want you to know I read this chapter. And another one that is, where is it? It's titled, How is it, or how, as it were, they deprive men of their virile member. There's 2 full chapters dedicated to this with like, what is that called? When witness testimony, with witness testimony stories in there of like guys telling about how their member was magicked away. And one of them was like, this lady stole my member and I had to beat her up till she gave it back. And that's like in the book as evidences. And there's so many more chapters, but the book also details like how you should be punishing them, what kind of different tortures you should do, like all these kinds of things. And so this book is published, and here's what's interesting about its first kind of read through is that the Catholic people that he showed it to considered it unethical and that it didn't fit within the Catholic beliefs of like demonology and stuff. And then he was like, poo-poo to that. I think it's great. And he got it published. And instead of like excommunicating him or anything else, they just decided to send him to Venice to teach to the masses there, where it was widely received. So for whatever reason, that was the consequences.
So the Catholic Church had a problem with a leader in their church, and they decided the best option was just to move him somewhere else. I feel like I've heard this story before.
Yeah, it might not be the first or last time that this happens historically. But it was super well received, and it became the go-to manual for inquisitors, judges, magistrates, whenever they were prosecuting witches. So much so that it had editions in German, French, Italian, and in English, which was quite a thing to have it in all of these languages.
That's wild to me that his first trial, the judge didn't believe him at all. His leaders don't believe what he's doing at all. And yet, because he got published, that made it true? Like, because it's in a book, it's true?
I mean, it like that happens consistently with a lot of these, which is another reason why it's so mind-blowing. Because most of these people that we're going to talk about today wrote a book of some kind, and it just gets published and accepted. And there's nobody going, wait a minute, that might not be true. And a lot of the people that do say, wait a minute, that might not be true, get very severely punished. It's wild. And here's what's a little bit disappointing is that in 1505, he just dies. Like, there's no cool justice. He just is like, I wrote this book. I'm amazing. I did great. I have saved so many lives and gotten rid of so many witches. And then he just like lives his life and dies. Which, I mean, 1505. So somebody math that for me. He was born in 1430. So 70 75.
75, which is a pretty good life for someone that age, I feel like.
Yeah, I was going to say, actually, now I feel even worse. I wish I hadn't done the math.
I mean, if it's any consolation, he had to live the last 40 years with no member.
I'm sure
That's no life.
Yeah, that's so true. So yeah, this is sort of the beginning of these witch hunters becoming a big profession. So there's a whole bunch of them, but I sort of picked the ones that I thought were most impactful or that I liked. So this next one is Johann von Schonenberg, and I did it as chronological as I could get. So Kramer died in 1505, and then in 1525, Johann von Schonenberg is born in Burg Hartzelstein in Schweizenheim. I feel like I did pretty good on that.
Yeah.
That was great.
And then in 1538, he became an important person in the Cathedral of Trier. I forgot to write down his position, but it was in the Cathedral of Trier. This is an important location in witch hunting history as well. So then we'll get to that in just a second. But in 1546 to 1548, he studied at University of Heidelberg and the University of Freiburg. So he's studied at two different universities, so he's a well-educated man. And then he's the Archbishop-elect of Trier from 1581 to 1599. And it's during this time that he presides over the witch trials of Trier. And this is like another witch trial that is massive. And I could probably do a whole episode or two on these witch trials in particular. But these happen in, so modern day Trier is a German city near the border of Luxembourg. But medieval Trier at the time was part of the Holy Roman Empire and became one of Rome's 4 capitals. I didn't even know Rome had 4 capitals at this time. I didn't know that was a thing. But they did. And it was almost more than just a city, but a wider region controlled by an archbishop-elect, which made it more important at that time because it was such a religious symbol, such a religious area. And it also became an area heavily associated with witchcraft because Pope Innocent VIII published his Summi Disturantes, which I think is Latin.
Probably Latin.
Yeah, I'm guessing. Which listed specific territories that he said were troubled by witchcraft, and Trier was among the listed locations. So Schonenberg, who was in charge of the area, was like, not on my watch. I will save and secure these souls. And so he decided that there was 3 major groups that were the cause of these issues, which was Jews, Protestants, and witches. And he was going to handle the situation. So it also helped at the time. They were having really bad crop failures, and there was starvation, and there was poverty, and there was social unrest. So it's kind of like a really great time to go in and be like, you know why this is happening? Witches, that's why. And so it was like very welcomed by the people. When he came in and was like, I'm going to save you guys. It's witchcraft. So he appointed Peter Binsfeld, and I'll talk a little bit about him in just a second, to sort of like kick off the whole thing. And so they started these witch trials, and they were kind of accusing everybody. And then they were encouraging families to like out each other and testify against each other. And torture was widely and harshly implemented to get confessions, and then also get those women to accuse other women. So they would torture you until you confessed and named other people that were also witches, so they could go get more witches and torture and continue. Okay, so yeah, they were like implementing torture. Just it was like the very base way of interrogating a witch. And then, in addition, peasants were hit very hard by this crop failure and by starvation. And so peasants started accusing nobles, which was not as common. And typically, if you were a noble, you were a judge, you were like a person of import, you were sort of excluded from getting accused or being a witch typically. But in this situation, they were like, nah, they're all witches. And it's, this huge amount of people, including nobles, that were getting accused and tortured and convicted. And so between the years of 1587 and 1593, a minimum of 360 people were burned alive for being accused and convicted as witches. And 1/3 of those victims, they say, were nobles or local government, which was very abnormal for witchcraft or witch trials. In a letter written by a tutor of a duke's son, he wrote, "Everywhere around here we see almost more stakes from burned witches than green trees." And that's like so harrowing to imagine living in that area. It probably was, like literally a living hell. And then this is sort of where these trials, I'm skipping a lot because I don't want to have this episode be about the witch trial, this witch trial in particular. But towards the end, Diedrich Flade, the chief judge of the electoral court and rector of Trier University, he was looking at this and he was like, this is not, like, I don't agree with this. And he was known for being lenient with being witches and implementing torture. He didn't believe in torture. He didn't believe in confessions that come from torture or accusations that come from torture. And so he was speaking against Schoenberg and these trials and this idea.
Sounds like witch talk to me.
Oh, I think you're catching on. Because very shortly after he got involved, suddenly people started accusing him of being a witch that were being tortured. And so they claimed of seeing him at Black Sabbath, and they claimed that he was a cannibal and all this kind of stuff. And so he tried to defend himself, but Schoenberg and Binsfield together were so zealous and so like passionate and convincing that the trial didn't go in Flade's favor, and he was convicted of being a witch. And he was tortured. Well, he wasn't convicted, but he was accused and then tortured so, like heinously that eventually he confessed, and that led to his conviction and execution. And then this is kind of when other people of higher status were like, wait a minute, this isn't good. Kind of like, they're starting to be affected, and so now it matters. And so there was another of Flade's colleagues at the university, and his name was Cornelius Luce, and he got involved after Flade's execution. Additionally, however, Luce was a Catholic priest and a theologian. He didn't believe that demons could actually force people to do the stuff that Schoenberg was saying people could do, and that gaining confessions from torture was not valid. He kind of held the same belief as Flade did. And he even wrote a manuscript about it and tried to get it published, but Schoenberg confiscated it and then arrested him. But they were sort of like a little chagrined to accuse him and kill him. So instead, they just had him they forced him to publicly denounce what he had written. And then they had him on constant surveillance. And then they were basically like arresting him and letting him go and arresting him and letting him go until 2 years later he died from the plague. Or at least that's what history says. The books say he died from the plague. But the conspiracy theorist in me thinks maybe there was more to it. But again, the plague was active, so maybe.
The plague was a thing too.
Yeah, that did happen historically. But after that time, the sort of fervor of the trials began to decrease. And even with this decreased enthusiasm, there was literature that was published by like Schoenberg and Binsfield and other people that were inspired by them. And it was sent out to places as far as Denmark. which actually influenced Denmark to have their own outbreak of witch trials, and then places near it. So it's sort of like, dominoed to these other places that were really far away. But by the end of the Trier witch trials, historians estimate somewhere between 500 and 1,000 people just in these Trier trials were executed. So I'm looking at you guys and you're not saying anything, which isn't like good, but you're both shaking your head just like mind's blown. It's just insane.
Yeah, it is crazy.
We're only on the second person.
Part of me is just wondering, like, was everybody stupid back then?
Okay, so here's what I was thinking about. Not to get political on you or anything. But, like, it seems people in power use these kind of superstitions or conspiracies. They used them way back in the day with witch trials, right? But that continues to be a thing. Like, the Red Scare during the Cold War, right, was more or less a witch hunt, right? It was like they called it a witch hunt because it was. It was the same kind of conspiracy-driven way to root out people that might not have been completely ideologically pure, right? So, like, we definitely had literal witch hunts called by a different name in, like, the 50s and 60s. And then even today we have QAnon, which I don't know how familiar you are with QAnon.
Not at all.
Okay. QAnon is a conspiracy theory that says that the Democratic leaders of the United States are pedophiles and cannibals. And it started with this guy posting anonymously named Q, that's why they're called QAnon, and he's called Q because he has quote unquote Q clearance. You can't see me online because I'm doing air quotes. But he had Q clearance, which means he had top secret clearance. But he would post stuff online and say, I found out that the Democrats are eating babies and also apparently having sex with them. And,
Before or after?
Probably both, right? I don't know, man. They think some heinous things about the leaders of the country at the time. And so he posted this stuff and it got this like groundswell of support of people that believe some pretty insane stuff. Mm-hmm. So, like, we can look and be like, oh, yeah, back then they were so dumb. But, like, nah, man, we're just as dumb today because there's plenty of people that believe that stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose that's fair, right? Wasn't there a few years ago, or maybe more than a few, but there was a pizza shop that got raided, right? Because people were saying there was, like, sex
ring in the basement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was just somebody on Facebook or something that started that rumor, and it took off.
Yeah.
Yeah, it wasn't true at all.
It wasn't true. And they had someone coming with a gun, and he was like, show me the basement. And they're like, we don't have a basement. That literally happened. And, like, that's kind of what happened with...
The Malleus Maleficarum, yeah.
Yeah, with the witch's hammer, where it just got out of hand, and this thing that they'd started, there was no way for them to turn it back.
Mm-hmm. Right. He found an audience in the people.
Yeah.
And that's where he got his power from.
Yeah.
And then it just continued with more and more.
Grow from that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Until he lost his member.
Yep. Well, no, it continued even after. It lived on longer than he and his member. Okay, so for Peter Binsfeld, he was the assistant for Schonenberg. So I really don't have I don't have to say a lot about him, except that he was known as a fierce witch hunter. So he had a reputation for that, which is probably why Schonenberg included him. Because he was...
Do you think being known as a fierce witch hunter, like, got the ladies? Or were they like...
Keep away from
Maybe not.
I mean, I would stay away. Because, like...
Well, I don't know. Right? While you've been talking, I've been thinking about, like, what would it be like to be back in this time, And initially, it seems like being afraid of everything, right? But maybe there's a lot of people who were like, well, I know I'm not a witch, so I know I'm safe, and I'm really glad that this guy is protecting us, right? Like, if you're buying into it completely, maybe they did love him, right? Like,
well, I mean, they do. They are super well
maybe he pulled.
Areas, so maybe
he pulled.
Maybe he
definitely
did.
pulled.
Maybe he did. And that's why he was so confident in everything he did. Because he was entirely in favor of torture. He found normal methods of torture were too lenient, so he liked to be like extra torturous.
Extra tortury?
Yeah, extra.
I know that it is a downer, but like when you say extra tortury, like what are we talking about?
So like a lot of the techniques, there's a couple that are like known for specific things. Him in particular was known, it doesn't say any specific techniques, so I can't say to that specifically, but I do know techniques included like sleep deprivation, and they would do something called dunking, which is they would tie a woman to a board and dunk her in water. And if she floated, she was a witch, because the idea behind it was that she was rejecting her baptism. So water rejected her and she would float. And if you were innocent, you would sink. You would drown and die, but you would drown and go to heaven, I suppose, is the idea behind it. And so that was a really commonly used one. Another one was they would... there was a position called like a witch pricker, and they would get needles and prick you all over your body to find a demon's mark, which is somewhere on your body where if it gets pricked, it doesn't hurt. And if they found that on a woman, then she was a witch. So they would prick her all over her entire body.
They could just go straight for the weenus.
Well, if a woman had one, I'm sure they would have.
Doesn't everybody?
Is a weenus not a penis?
No, isn't the skin right here on your elbow?
I thought it was a weenus, not a penis.
Why are you laughing at me?
The weenus is the skin of your elbow?
Is it not?
I don't know.
All right, Google, save me from this humiliation.
Some people have two weenuses.
Weenus is a slang word for the excess or loose skin at the joint of one's elbow, which is technically referred to as olecranon skin.
Okay, well, egg on my face.
All right.
Everybody has two
Everybody
weenuses.
goes strait for the weenus. That's what we learned when you're pricking things. You want to start with the weenus.
Yeah. I feel bad laughing so hard because, like, the next things I'm gonna say go back to being downers.
Okay, well then let's avoid that for a minute while I say, how would they get over the cognitive dissonance of murdering a bunch of innocent women, like by drowning? Because I'm pretty sure, my Bible may not be up to complete theologian standards.
It's not the 1400 edition.
But I think they look down on murder.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's one of the 10 commandments.
And yet they go, oh, good, she's innocent, but she died.
Yeah, I think the thought behind it was that they were like, it's okay because she's going to heaven, but nobody didn't float.
Wouldn't that make all murder fine though? If you're like, if they go to heaven, murder's okay, then you just be like, great, I can kill whoever I want as long as they're a good person.
I mean, I guess that's what some crazy people think.
That is reverse Batman.
Yeah, that's what that is. But I think the real thing, the idea behind it was that they were never wrong.
Yeah.
People float. And so that was kind of the idea behind it. So we can talk about other torture methods later as we get to other people. But
oh boy,
I know you're waiting in bated breath.
You asked.
I did ask.
Yeah.
But I would love if there was a journal where he was like, drowned 3 women, one of them was innocent. How do I feel about this? Like, if we knew, if
sad
there was
face.
one thing, a sad emoji, the inventor of the sad emoji.
And that's his other thing he's famous for. No, but what he's actually famous for is he was the one that was encouraging people to accuse their family and try and save their souls. And he also wrote a book that listed demons with their accompanying sins. So he's the guy that sort of organized the 7 deadly sins. So he put lust with Asmodeus, I don't know how you say it. Gluttony was Beelzebub, greed was Mammon, sloth was Belphegor, which I don't know that guy. Wrath is Satan, envy is Leviathan, and pride was Lucifer. And so
I thought Satan and Lucifer were the same person.
I thought so too, but they're not. And apparently, Satan, Lucifer, and the devil are 3 different
The reverse Godhead.
entities. Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I also didn't look super into that.
Yeah.
And then, so yeah, he was part of the Trier witch trials and sort of just like lived out his days. And then he died from the plague. So that's, at least the plague got him. Classic. Yeah. Classic 1500s. So then the next one is Nicolas Remy. He was a French magistrate. So I said the name very like an English speaker, but there it is.
How do you say Nicolas Remy with a French accent?
It's pretty close. I would probably say Nicolas Remy.
So there you go.
Nicolas Remy.
Yes, really get in there. Remy.
Remy.
Nailed it. So his kind of thing was that he was a very ambitious witch hunter. So originally he was a lawyer, and he got really into witch hunting because his son died, and he blamed it on a local beggar who he said cursed his son. And so after that happened, Remy was like, not on my watch. I'm going to rise up the social ladder and become a witch hunter and punish witches. And so in 1583, he became a noble. And then in 1591, he was named the Procurer General of the Duchy of Lorraine. And then he just kind of got busy with doing witch hunting and writing books. And so his kind of like quote unquote claim to fame as a witch hunter was he believed that witchcraft was hereditary. And so the best thing to do was if you convicted a witch, then what you needed to do was kill that entire bloodline. And that's kind of what he advocated for and was famous for.
Even the men?
It says the entire bloodline, so I would assume that would include the men.
The witches and the children?
Yeah, like everybody that he could find of the family. Which is like so tragic to me. I mean, obviously it's all tragic, but he also clearly stated that judges and magistrates were immune to the power of the devil. And so so they couldn't.
That's so convenient.
Yeah.
And also people named Remy.
Well known for being immune. So yeah, and he also stated that lawyers should be respected by magistrates as gods and described the courts as temples and sanctuaries. So lawyers, magistrates, that kind of stuff. And just kind of echoed a lot of stuff that was said in the Malleus Maleficarum in his writing, talking about if you don't believe in witches or if you're lenient towards witches, then that's blasphemy and that kind of stuff, which he directly takes from the Malleus Maleficarum. Something that's like a fun fact about him is much later in the future. I haven't seen the show, but there's a show called Werewolf. And in the show, I was like, maybe Brandon's seen it because I know your wife likes these kinds of shows. So if you've seen it, let me know.
Is it about teenagers?
I don't know.
Teenage werewolves and vampires?
Yeah.
She probably didn't see it.
I don't know. But it's called Werewolf. And in the show, there's a werewolf that uses his position as a magistrate to hide his lycanthropy. Or lycanthropy, however you say that word. Anyways, so they're in the future. I feel like he's shown as the kind of like devious person that he was like hiding himself behind this. Anyways, so I thought that was like fun for him.
Yeah.
Yeah, like Teen Wolf.
Yeah, but evil. So the next one is...
I like the idea that people are just tacking on stuff, and he's like, witches are bad, we all know it. And we also know that magistrates are gods. Like he just kind of sneaks it in there at the end.
Yeah, he really does. And I think that's why he busied himself with not just witch hunting, but like writing and publishing books. Because he was like, I'm really good at witch hunting, but just so you know, these people are immune, and that's why I'm safe. So you can trust me. So yeah, the next one is Alonso de Salazar Frias, and he was born in 1564 in Burgos. So this guy is sort of a good guy. And that's why I wanted to include him in the list, because we sort of have a good guy here. Actually, I would say not even sort of. I think he's a good guy, considering that he's like living in the 1564 time. So his father was a lawyer, and he belonged to an influential family of civil servants and prosperous merchants. And he was appointed as the vicar general and judge of the court of the bishop by the Bishop Jean. In 1600, he was elected attorney general of the Castilian Church. And then in 1608, he was selected as an inquisitor, so he was part of the Spanish Inquisition. And in 1631, he became a member of the Inquisition's Supreme Council. So he's a very important figure at this time. And so he joined the tribunal in Spain in 1609 that was going on at that time. And this was kind of in tandem with other witch trials that were happening in Europe. And so they were very influenced by those. And so there was like a big fever of witch huntery happening. And there was a huge group that were together talking about this, because this was in tandem with the trials that were going on with Pierre de Lance, and I think we'll talk about him in a little bit. But there was a gathering which reported in history with 30,000 people attending, and there was mass accusations and mass confessions that followed this. And it included children that were like 8 years and younger, that were being accused as witches and being confessed as witches. And they had listed as people that they needed to like find and arrest 7,000 people that they were like, we need to find and arrest these 7,000 accused and confessed witches. And Alonso looked at that and was like, that's insane. And so he went through, because he's in a major position here, and he said, we have to exclude every child accusation and every child confession. They're off the table. And then he concluded that accusations and confessions were insufficient evidence to convince him or any like judge of justice that that was enough to bring a person in. So if it was only accusations and these like forced confessions, then he wasn't counting those. And he wrote in a report, I have not found one single proof, nor even the slightest indication from which to infer that one act of witchcraft has actually taken place. The testimony of accomplices alone, without further support from external facts substantiated by persons who were not witches, is insufficient to warrant even one arrest. And then he additionally wrote, these claims go beyond all human reason, and many even past the limits permitted the devil. He concluded, if the devil was involved, how could he allow his machinations to be exposed so easily by children of 8 years and under? So I really like this guy. So after everything was said and done, he brought the number of people that were tried down to 30. And the amount of people that were actually convicted and executed was either 11 or 12. It's written as both.
Yeah. I was curious as to how this guy was going to end up coming off as a good guy, but I suppose that's a good effort there to reduce the number.
Yeah.
It's kind of funny that one of the arguments against it is that if the devil was involved, he would have done a better job.
Yeah. Right? But I'm also
That's a good argument, though.
Yeah, I'll take what I can get if it saves lives. So what I'll do is we'll sort of segue into Pierre de Lance, or
Is it the CRE guy? Mm-hmm. So
Lanc. Pierre de Lanc. And to start off with a fun fact for you, he was featured in Assassin's Creed.
Really?
Yeah.
Which one?
Oh boy, I sure didn't write that
Hold on, when did he live and where was he?
It was 1609, and he was a judge of Bordeaux in the province of in France.
It must have been one of the Ezio ones then. I feel like that was...
Yeah, he wasn't a good guy. I looked it up. He is, I mean, they're very historically accurate. Yeah. So he's historically accurately...
I mean, they're sort of historically accurate.
I mean,
except for the main plot and...
The entire game.
Yeah.
Other than that... But they like do a lot of research and include a lot of historical.
They include real people.
Yeah, and so he's accurately portrayed as the bad guy, from what I saw. Here is what a French writer wrote about him at the time, because he wasn't a good guy. So he was libidinous and sensual, narrow-minded, sectarian and stubborn, given to an incommensurate vanity. He was infatuated with himself and with his importance. Furthermore, he feared the power of the devil and of demons, and was of an infantile credulity, surprising in a man who possessed, as he did, real culture, sadistic and cruel, a born inquisitor, and a Tartuffe, which I didn't know what that was, so I Googled it. And it's a religious hypocrite or a hypocritical pretender to excellence of any kind.
I'm going to bring that into the modern vernacular.
Yeah.
It's like you're a bunch of tartuffes. Anytime someone is.
It's such a good word. And so, yeah, he was...
My next dog's going to be called
Tartuffe. That's actually a great dog. You can call him Toofy. For sure.
Cute. So this guy was luckily not in power for very long. I keep covering my mouth. I hope I'm not.
Yeah, you shouldn't do that.
Yeah, I probably shouldn't. So he was named judge personally by King Henry IV, and he was endowed with a great amount of power because King Henry wanted him specifically to end witchcraft in the area, because he was like, this is a witchy place, take care of it. And De Loncker was like, hold my beer, and was like all in. And he was only in office for 4 months before his extreme and bloodthirsty views even made the people, like the leadership at that time, they were like, you got to step down. And so in those 4 months, he personally had 80 people executed for witchcraftery. But he was, and he spent time after this, like writing books and that kind of stuff, because he was severely disappointed that he was taken down from his position, because he considered this area as infested, and that these witches were an infestation, and that he knew that there was thousands of witches in the area, and if they had let him stay, he would have gotten them all executed. He also listed things that you could look for to help identify a witch.
Were any of them milk related?
None of them, not a single one. He listed other things, which are great. One of them, which seems like an obvious one that's like culturally we do this, is having lizards or toads as a pet.
Sure.
I mean, that's even in Harry Potter.
Pointy hats.
Not listed, no.
Cloaks.
Dancing.
He was doing all the hits.
Dancing indecently.
Take that line over again.
Yeah. Dancing indecently was one of them. And then swearing was one of them. And then eating too much was another. He explained in his books that Satan didn't like to have sex with single ladies because he preferred married women. And that was because you got the added bonus of adultery. And so...
Sure.
Yeah.
I feel like Satan's not that picky.
That's the cherry on top.
Yeah, it just is, a bonus.
What other sins can we put on top of that? He's like, and if you do it on top of a Bible, and if you're eating too much food, this guy hates that.
All of it. And
then we're going to go dance indecently.
Yep. And you're a witch, and that's it. So, yeah, he had these kind of bizarre things that he wrote and published, and was kind of like seen as this kind of crazy guy that was like, like end of times, crazy, yelling at the corners of the streets and stuff. And so he was outcast for his extreme views, which he held on to for the rest of his life, but he was never accepted after that. So, yeah, I mean, I appreciate that. So yeah, and then there was Balthasar von Dernbach.
Isn't Balthazar one of the devils that other guy said?
That's what I thought, but it isn't.
Yeah.
It's Balfigor.
Oh, dang.
Although I feel like Balthazar is a demon name. It seems like it.
It seems a little demonic.
Yeah, it really does. And he doesn't fall far from it. So he was a Benedictine monk. At the age of 12, he was sent to the Fulda monastery and spent most of his life there, working up through the ranks. Ultimately, after, doing all of his work there, he was made the Prince Abbot, which I didn't know was a position, but it was. And he was super against Protestantism. And so he started forcing his subjects to return to the Catholic faith. And turns out people didn't like them. And so they revolted and he had to resign from his position. But then 25 years later, they were like, we're just kidding. We want you back. We miss you. I can fix him. And so they brought him back. And so to make the people happy, even though he still kind of hated Protestants, he decided instead to focus his hatred on witches, which triggered one of the largest trials in history. Not the largest, obviously, we talked about one of the largest, but it's up there, resulting in around 250 victims. And he was really, really heading this whole thing up. And the trials lasted only 3 years, 1603 to 1606. And he had an apprentice that was working under him, his protege. So during the trials, so in 1605, Dernbach died, and his protege was Balthasar Nuss. So he tried to continue the trials, but they sort of, as soon as Dernbach died, people were like, oh, this was just about gaining, wealth and reputation. So they revolted against Nuss, and they killed him. So they jailed him and then beheaded him. So there's that at least. So then the next one we're going to talk about is Sebastian Michaelis. And so here's a fun fact about this guy, because obviously we have to bring in the fun facts so it's a little less of a downer, the episode. So there's an anime called The Black Butler. I haven't actually seen it. I've heard it's very good, and I've watched a lot of anime, but that isn't one of them. But there is a demon that is the main character butler, and his name is Sebastian Michaelis, or Mike. It's Michaelis. So Michaels. Mike. Anyways,
We just call him Sebastian.
we're gonna call him Sebastian. So I thought that was really funny because his thing was more on demons than it was witches. So he became a Grand Inquisitor, and he was just really good at his job. He wrote a book about the admirable history of a possession and conversion of a penitent woman. And that in that book, he writes the hierarchy of devils, which he learned from a really famous French possession of a bunch of nuns. So so this was in France around 1610-ish, 1609. And it's kind of starts with this young girl. She's 17. Her name is Madeleine de Demondol de la Palude. All French. I apologize. But we're going to call her Madeleine. And she was an Ursuline nun. And she met the family friend, which was Father Louis Gaufridi, and they became lovers.
Thanks, Ron Burgundy.
I'm sorry. And so people were like, you can't do that. That's super not good. And they sent her to a convent, and there she confessed everything. And they were like, okay, so that's definitely not good. So you have to stop talking to Father Gaffridi, and we're going to send you to Aix. It's AIX. It's a city. Aix-en-Provence. Aix-en-Provence. And so then 2 years later, in 1611, Madeline starts having symptoms, as they called it, of demonic possession, and she started flipping out, and she was contorting her body, and she broke a crucifix. And so they're like, she's definitely possessed by a demon. These are clear demonic possession signs. And so the doctors prescribed an exorcism. So they bring somebody in, but the exorcism doesn't work. And she tells them that it's Father Gaffridi and that he's a devil worshiper, and that he's been getting busy with her since she was 17, and that's why she's possessed by a demon or a devil. And she claimed that her main demonic occupant was Beelzebub. And then shortly after she started displaying symptoms of being possessed, 3 other nuns, and then after that, 8 more nuns. So it was sort of getting out of hand, and they were like, we got to call in a professional. So they called Sebastian, and they called in Sebastian, and then they also called in Father Gaffridi, because he was accused of causing the possession for Madeline, but he wasn't for the other nuns. And so they were like, we'll have you exorcise these other nuns. Because that'll go well.
He's like, good. I'll exercise them real good.
But surprisingly, while he was trying to exorcise this other nun, who was, she was known as kind of the one that was most possessed, other than maybe Madeline, and her name was Louise Capot. And so she denounced Father Gaffridi, saying he was a sorcerer and a cannibal, and that he was doing like unimaginable sexual perversions. And so they were like, this guy is definitely a devil worshiper. And Sebastian was like, search his room. So they searched his room, and they didn't find anything. And so the judges and stuff were like, okay, well, we couldn't find anything.
What were they hoping to find?
I don't know. I wish it was listed.
Upside down crucifixes.
Yeah, like
some pentagrams.
He just brings his devil stuff with him. There's a pair of removable horns and a whole goat.
It seems like this would be an excellent time to bring back the argument that the devil would not be like calling out his own servants, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I just feel bad for everybody involved. Anybody, everybody, everywhere, all the time. So he demands to have his name cleared. And so they bring him back to court. And Sebastian's like, now's my time, son. I've got you in court. It's over. And so Sebastian took over, and they brought in Madeline, and they brought in Louise Capot, and it was the first trial where they actually allowed the victims' testimonies to actually sway like the jury, like they were in there actually participating in the trial, which in other ones they hadn't, apparently.
But okay, this doesn't make any sense because the testimony is from allegedly possessed women.
Mm-hmm. And they counted it.
But devils don't lie.
Obviously, they're not known for that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the court found devil's marks on her, so there was irrefutable evidence that she was actually possessed.
Was it on the weenus?
I don't know where it was found. I'm sorry, Brian.
It was probably both weenus, the weenai.
So then they thought Sebastian was like, the best way to handle this is to torture him to get any kind of confession. So Father Gaffridi was subject to mental and physical torture. And then magically, during that time, a pact between him and the devil surfaced that was supposedly signed in Father Gaffridi's blood. And then additionally, right after that, there was a signed confession that Father Gaffridi wrote that he was, admitted to celebrating Black Mass, and that was how he gained power over women, is what he said in his confession. In court, he strongly recanted everything that he said, because he said that he only said it because he was tortured. But Sebastian was like, too bad. And so they convicted him, and he was dragged through the streets for 5 hours and then strangled and burned. So,
I mean, he wasn't a good guy, though. Like, he abused some nuns.
I mean, he wasn't a good guy, but he definitely was not.
He wasn't a witch.
Oh, yeah, witch or like made a pact with the devil. And then, so in these possessions, during these possessions, is where Sebastian gets the list of the hierarchy of the devils, as well as their position. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but this is kind of an example. So like Beelzebub was the former prince of the seraphim, and he was responsible for the sin of pride and arrogance. And then it listed who his weakness was, which would be like a saint or something like that,
So is the implication here that he just sat down with these possessed girls and was like, all right, before we do this exorcism, can you give me some of the details about Satan's like...
Yeah, like I really don't know. That seems to me like what he did, because the list has like 16 people and their order and like all of that information for almost all of them. And it is very extensive. So I can't imagine him doing it any other way, where they're like, we've got access to these devils, might as well use it.
What I wish that we could figure out is like how this spread. Like this one girl was acting out, right? She was claiming to have been possessed and being all crazy, but there were other people that started doing this as well. Mm-hmm. And like, I don't believe that they were possessed. So what was really going on? You know, like, was it just, it was cool and trendy? Let's get in on this. Like, it makes me kind of think of like in the 90s, there were a lot of alien abductions and like this kind of stuff, right? There were people claiming that, and it was pretty prevalent. It would have been like, I mean, they made TV shows about it because it was such a prevalent thing. But that's kind of died off, right? I mean, we don't really hear about alien abductions anymore. Maybe that's the 90s version of witch trials and stuff. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. It's just really interesting that these other nuns got in on the act or whatever.
Yeah, which is really interesting because this very same thing we'll talk about when we actually talk about the Salem witch trials, because it's something that like I feel like happens very frequently, where it kind of, you know, snowballs and other people get involved, where you're like, you didn't have to get involved. You didn't need to say that you were possessed by a demon. Like, I don't know why this is. And for these guys, I honestly don't know. Part of me is like, maybe they were afraid that their infidelities would be caught, and that was their way of, you know, explaining covering for it. Yeah. You know? And so I don't know. But after, like, that's what he's really well known for. And he's still sort of revered today as an important figure in ancient science and demonologists. You know, he just kind of, it doesn't say anything about his death. It just, he lived out the rest of his life. So, yeah, he was just sort of known for marking down this extensive list of.
What happened to the girls that were possessed, the nuns, after they testified? Were they then like, great, thanks for your testimony, now burn at the stake time? Or
no,
well, they could do an exorcism, right?
Yeah, so
most of them, it's the one that works.
Surprisingly, after Father Graffiti was executed, they were all fine. However, in an ironic twist, about 30 years later, Madeline herself was accused and convicted for witchcraft. She wasn't executed though. She was remanded to her family and lived the rest of her life with them. So, yeah, interesting. We have two more for you, and then we're gonna wrap it up. So Matthew Hopkins was born in 1620s. We're getting closer to the Salem witch trials at this point, because the witch trials happen in the late 1600s. So Matthew Hopkins was born in 1620s. There isn't much known about his younger years, and that's mostly because he kind of didn't matter until he started doing his witchcraft stuff. And as many as 200 cases are attributed to him and his followers. And he himself, he gave himself a name as the Witchfinder General because he was so good at it. It's believed that he took up the call for financial reasons, not religious. And that was something that at the time they even knew that. And I think part of that, and we'll get into this a little bit with this next one too, is it was kind of a lucrative job by this point.
So toss a coin to your witcher?
Yeah, something like that. Except for, I feel like he's the reverse. He's who these witch hunters would want to kill. But yeah, it was definitely like, call in a witch hunter. Because they have, we've got outspoken and opinionated women.
How did they get paid?
So from what I understand, there are some places that would call them in on like contract.
Okay.
The next one we talk a little bit about because we actually have written down how much this next person gets paid. But they get called in for, specific towns or areas that had like a witch problem, and they would get brought in to kind of solve it.
Okay. So it wasn't like, oh, I accuse you of being a witch and now I get your stuff. It was like the mayor or the townspeople
and
would pay.
Sometimes it was very much so, we get your stuff now. So and we'll talk again, the Salem witch trials cover this beautifully. But the townspeople, the mayors, the judges, and that kind of stuff often would receive benefits from the witches that they get executed, because that land has to go somewhere, and that all of that kind of stuff has to go somewhere, and so the city confiscates a lot of it, from what I understand. So yeah, it is a very lucrative business on many levels. And so yeah, he was just like a really well-known witch hunter, but was also definitely known for being in it for the money. And he was the one that really used ducking that we talked about, and sleep deprivation were his two kind of favorites.
Just clear, are you saying duck or dunk?
So it's called ducking, but what they're doing is dunking. I looked it up multiple places because I was like, duck, quack, quack, duck. And it is spelled duck, quack, quack, duck.
That's what is that, Monty Python?
Yeah. Yeah. That's exactly what I thought of too. Is it like if you weigh more than a duck?
Yeah.
It's a goose.
A goose.
It's a goose in Monty Python.
Yeah,
Is it?
Yeah.
But it's the same kind of ridiculous stuff. And then again, not a lot is known about his life other than he was really overzealous in his nature. But legend says that he died because he was accused of being a witch and was forced to go through all the torture methods that he used on other people, and then was executed in that fashion. But there's not any actual documentation of that. That's just, the scuttlebutt.
The scuttlebutt in the witch hunter forums.
Yeah.
In
the
Reddit
witch hunter
at
Reddit.
1420 or 1620.
Yeah.
So do we know who accused him?
It doesn't say.
All right. Because I want, how often, if I were being tortured, maybe I would, everybody admits to something when they're being tortured. But could I say, and you're a witch too? We're witches together, and try and get the guy who's
down with you.
Yeah, I'm going down. You're coming with me.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like these are all really great ideas you guys are coming up with.
We would be the best witch hunters because we would
witches.
We would go in and we would be like, "Listen, we're going to torture you. First off, the first rule is you can't accuse us. We know that trick, and it's not going to work. That's why that one guy, who was
the one that was
judges, magistrates, and judges
cannot be witches.
Yeah,
also torturers.
Also witch hunters can't be witches.
Yeah, obviously.
Which wouldn't hunt other witches.
Or can they? And that's who we're going to finish off with.
Oh, no.
John Dixon. And I'll tell you why he's one of my favorites is because he was actually a woman cross-dressing as a man to get the job as a witch hunter. And I'm like, she's my girl. because witch hunting was a male-only profession at the time. Obviously. And she did it fairly well, in that her actual identity, they're not 100% sure of it. But she's documented as Christian Caldwell. And so that's what they say her actual name is, but her alias was John Dixon. And she worked in Moyshire, Scotland in the 1660s. So she created this alias, and then her official title was Witch Pricker, because she was called in to do, we talked about
the weenuses.
Yes, that job. And she got her first contract was for a year, and she would live and work in that area, and she received 6 shillings a day. And that was kind of what she did. She would go get contracts in areas. And so her main method also of identifying witches was just finding a devil's mark through that method. And so she was actively finding witches in an area, and she was doing fine. She didn't have high numbers to her name, but she had enough to still get hired. And then she went to an area and just accused the wrong person because she accused a man. And he was like, "Wrong, you're a witch." And they were like, "Oh, throw down." So they took them both to get, they took them both in. And he was the guy that she accused. His name was John Hay. And he was a court messenger. And so they're like, "Well, he's more important than you are. So we're going to torture you to see if you are actually a witch." And it's very common when you're looking for witches' marks or torturing to, derobe the person entirely. And that's when they were like, "Wait a minute.
Did a witch take off your member?"
Yeah, I was gonna make the same joke. I had it locked and like ready to roll. I was gonna. But that's the obvious defense. Yeah. They're like, "What are you doing?" She's like, "It was a witch."
Well, it didn't work because they were like, "You're a woman and you're a witch," and so it was like the worst kind of gender reveal party, and she was convicted. But she wasn't executed, per se. She was banished to, for just something. Anyways, she was banished. I don't know if that's the name or if I just like goobered on the keyboard. Anyways, it was a plantation in Barbados that she got sent to. And there's no record of her actually making it to Barbados or any kind of life in Barbados. But it was known that there was, that it was like fever ridden, the particular plantation she was sent to. So it's unlikely that she either survived the journey or survived very long. So, and that is where we're going to wrap it up for today, because it's so much already. But this is all sort of the precursor, like the build up to the Salem witch trials, because
really good stuff.
Really good stuff. The meat here, because really, like a lot of this literature that these guys were publishing, especially the Malleus Maleficarum, are used, and then court cases, like ones where they actually let the victims be in the courtroom, kind of set precedents that all took effect at the Salem witch trials that in other trials wouldn't have worked. And so it was sort of like this one thing from here and this one thing from here and this one thing from here. And instead of just doing one or two things abnormal, they did them all abnormal, which sort of created the problem that was the Salem witch trials. So hopefully you'll keep listening to the next couple as we continue the Salem witch trials. And again, thanks for stopping by Arts and Crimes. Okay, bye.
Yeah, well, the Van Helsing joke, I feel bad because he's clearly a vampire hunter.
Yeah.
Not a witch hunter.
Well, I mean,
someone's really going to fact check us on
I know.
that. Zing bang me.
So good.